Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar here from Future Today Institute, where we're going to be looking at mobility, robotics, and drones. So jumping into what we're planning on covering today, we're going to be introducing you really quickly to FTI. We're also going to take a look at our trend report overall that was released in the past couple weeks. We'll look at some trend highlights, specifically from the mobility, robotics, and drones section. And then we'll also look at some key takeaways from that part of the report. And if we have some time at the end, we'll also look to do some Q&A. My colleague Ryan Hogan will be joining us, and he'll be moderating those questions as they come through. Just broadly, from a housekeeping perspective, if you do have any questions or comments, please feel free to send them through via the Q&A function. Ryan will be watching for that and answering any questions as they come in. And we're also going to be recording this session should you want to look at it later. You can feel free to download this report as well as other sections of the trend report at futuretodayinstitute.com/trends. So a couple things about me. My name is Nick Bartlett. I'm a director here at Future Today Institute. I also lead the transportation and manufacturing vertical as well as the finance and insurance verticals. My background is primarily in corporate strategy and insights generation, and I spent most of my time at financial services companies throughout the Fortune 100. FTI, broadly speaking, is a foresight consultancy that was founded by Amy Webb in 2006. We are really dedicated to the application of foresight globally across a wide array of industries and organizational types. FTI works with organizations around the globe on every continent and applying our proprietary foresight methodology in a customized way to each engagement and need. We're really here to help organizations navigate uncertainty and provide tools to work towards the futures that they prefer. At the end of the day, we are focusing on doing all of this work using data and evidence-backed methodologies and are looking to lay out versions of plausible futures. We are really focused on preparing for the future, not necessarily predicting it. As I mentioned, we work with a wide variety of companies. Some of those can be seen here. But I think what's key is looking at our methodology. We try to view the world through a number of different lenses and work through a strategic methodology that focuses on what is influencing the future when we look at signals and trends, looking at what are potential futures when we look at macro scenarios, and then thinking about what your organization's future might be when we get into strategic scenarios. Here you'll see our funnel that looks at our methodology in a little bit more detail. As I mentioned, looking at influencing the futures and signals and longer term trends, this is really what we view as what we can know about the marketplace. We identify signals here, clusters, that eventually form into trends that are part of the longer term foundational work that we're always looking at. Our trend report is really positioned here, and we release that every year to have that foundation and make sure that that's accessible to the entire marketplace. Our second layer, that purple section there, that's really looking at what we cannot know about the marketplace. These are uncertainties, developments that no one entity can really control or have full insight into how that will evolve. We will formulate perspectives here on how we think things may evolve, again, with the goal of preparing and not necessarily predicting the future. And then finally, our blue layer there is where we bring all of this information together and start to identify what those opportunities and threats might be for the organizations that we work with, and also help organizations take steps to plan for their futures that they prefer and eventually put those plans into action. So let's look at the trend report overall. This is our 16th year of publishing the trend report. There are, in fact, 666 trends. That is not a joke. We did that completely by accident this year. It spans almost 820 pages. And at the moment, we're projecting about 1.2 million downloads for this year. The trend report is broken out into 14 different books, which you can see here. We cover topics like AI, the metaverse. We're talking about mobility here. We also look at supply chain, computing, bioengineering, a wide variety of topics. If you're interested in looking at the rest of those, again, you can go to futuretodayinstitute.com/trends to check those out and download them. We'll also be hosting other webinars that cover these trends just like this one. You can find those, again, at futuretodayinstitute.com/events. We choose a theme every year for our trend report. Focus was our theme for this year. And really, that's just because there are so many exponential developments going on in different areas of the marketplace. We had advancements in nuclear fusion this year. ChatGPT has blown up and just been huge and a major topic of discussion for folks. We've seen the decline or softening of the metaverse market for many people. We've, of course, had conflict in Ukraine, and then threats of global recession and economic instability for many folks across the world. It becomes very easy to miss which developments are most important for you and your organization, and potentially getting sidetracked by all these events and what's going on in the news. So we really want to make sure that we are focusing on what's important. And that's why we chose that for the theme this year. We hope that you feel that this brings some focus to your world and gives you a bit of a playbook as to what to look at. So diving into this session specifically, we're going to be looking at mobility, robotics, and drones, and some highlights there. So I'm sure you may be wondering, why are we lumping these three together and they're not in their own books? We have this discussion every year and look at whether or not we should break them apart or keep them together. But we feel as though there's a lot of aspects of these three areas that have commonalities and blend together. So we'd like to keep them as one so that we can discuss them in more of a whole. A few highlights from this past year. Certainly the chip shortage, there was some improvement, but broadly speaking, the supply chains continued. We did see some vehicles come back into the marketplace, but folks are still struggling with chip shortages. And as we move into this current year in 2023, obviously the discussion of chip nationalism is becoming much broader, and we will see how that plays out. But it would not be unlikely to see a real bifurcation in the marketplace where you have US made chips or US approved chips, and then chips that are manufactured in China or with China's partners involved. Also, EV evolution, that was huge this year. EVs were everywhere and anywhere, particularly pickup trucks. You really couldn't get away from that, whether it be commercials or discussions in the news. It was also interesting this year, a lot of automakers showed off new cabin designs, a lot more entertainment options, tech options in their vehicles. We'll talk about that a little bit more as we move through the trends, but really the growth of EVs is changing a lot from that perspective, and will continue to do so. This was a big one right at the end of the year. Level 3 autonomy was approved for Mercedes-Benz to be used in the US and Nevada specifically for the first time. So this will be the first instance where in the United States, a vehicle will be able to be driven with a driver not necessarily paying attention to the road. So this is a big step forward, particularly in the autonomous vehicle realm. And then finally, one other interesting highlight, again, from towards the end of the year with eVTOLs, Dubai approved the first advanced air mobility business park, and this is really designed to help companies test and experiment with eVTOLs in one centralized location. We'll talk a little bit more about those types of vehicles as we move through this presentation, but this will be interesting moving forward, where it finally gives us a centralized place in which to view the developments that are taking place, instead of having to look through a bunch of disparate efforts by a number of different companies. So all of this, as I said, we want to make sure that we're looking at some of the key themes across each of these different segments here. And really what we're seeing is there's electrification, automation, and autonomy. Mobility in particular is making some huge strides towards battery-powered vehicles. Robotics and drones, really at the end of the day have been focused on an electric future for many, many years now. Especially as you see vehicles, moving down the sidewalks. They really have been battery powered from the start in many ways. I think really some of the key aspects there, though, is what's happening with legislation. Tax credits have fueled changes in prices. We've seen companies have specifically changed the price of their vehicles just to stay under those credit thresholds here in the US, to try to encourage more purchasing by consumers. It'll also be interesting to see here what happens with battery recycling. We'll talk about that a little bit more in as we go through this, but it will be very interesting to see what will happen with prices there and how that will impact the overall cost of vehicles in the marketplace. Legislation, just to circle back on that, has also been interesting because we're now really starting to see more of a specific push towards phasing out internal combustion engines. We saw legislation enacted across the EU, in Canada, and a couple of states here in the US. Businesses are going to be forced to respond to these mandates. If you're in a position where you have a fleet of vehicles that are running on internal combustion engines right now, there will come a point in time where you're going to have to seriously consider switching over to EVs to meet those regulations that are coming down the pike. And furthermore, the increasing level of expectations that come with ESG considerations for shareholders or just your customers in general will definitely start to change the marketplace and who is buying what when. Another big aspect is automation. We're seeing that mobility is continuing to add and increase the number of automated safety features. So you think of these as like the ADAS systems. As these capabilities continue to increase, that will help drive autonomy. But for now, for the most part, these are just helping drivers be safer, drive more efficiently, and are taking a few tasks, maybe we can say, off of their plates as they go down the road. I think the real big thing, though, with automation is that it's here to stay. We're going to see robots and drones be used in increasing number of circumstances across businesses, regardless of industry. The number of applications continue to increase every day. And quite frankly, the opportunities to purchase and make that capital investment are coming close, if not already here, to outweighing the downside of potentially replacing folks or moving them, more importantly, to higher order jobs. I think there's really a big aspect there that is often overlooked of providing more safety for workers. If you can automate aspects of their job that are dull, dirty, or dangerous, that really leads to not only a better work environment, but most times a better product because you're seeing fewer errors made in the manufacturing line. It's also important here that we keep in mind that as automation leads to autonomy, there's going to be impacts across not only these couple markets, but also most industries out there. Levels of autonomy are going to enable machines, whether they be robots, drones, or these vehicles, to not only drive much more efficiently, but operate in a much safer manner, theoretically. These moves to automation are heavily reliant upon vast amounts of data. And that data right now is being collected by your vehicle and mine, as well as a number of efforts by a multitude of companies to go collect that data independently. This move to autonomy, while it's not going to happen overnight, is going to be substantial. And I don't think we can downplay that enough. One of the biggest areas that's impacting across all of these themes and will probably be impacted most by autonomy is that last mile delivery problem that continues to persist throughout the marketplace. Last mile delivery being that delivery from a hub or some sort of spoke or a specific store to the end customer. A lot of times now we're seeing issues where the use of human drivers or drones or even robots is hindered by the ability for them to access where the final customer lives. And that can range from the customer is in an extremely rural area that would be difficult or arduous to get out to, or it could be because the customer is 9 floors up in a walk up in a city, and the robot cannot actually go up those stairs. The human driver doesn't have access to the building, whatever it may be. So there continues to be these problems with last mile delivery of efficiently getting products into the hands of the customer. Hopefully, imparting levels of automation and autonomy will start to solve that, especially as we see these vehicles become more capable of transporting larger and heavier objects, as they continue to evolve. So from here, what I'd like to do is jump a little bit more specifically into each of these 3 areas. So we'll look at mobility first, then robotics, and then drones, and then wrap up with some key takeaways. So looking at mobility, electrification is really transforming these automotive ecosystems. I mentioned this earlier, but I don't think this can be understated, especially where you start to see that companies are making substantial moves to restructure. Big ones have been Ford splitting out into 2 distinct electric and internal combustion engine divisions. Hyundai decided to completely forego and shut down its ICE division. And then Stellantis is now reviving its Lancia brand as an EV-only platform. So, manufacturers are making bets here. They are investing heavily. Some companies like Volvo and GM have noted that they think profitability will be attained by 2025 when they start making the investments in EVs. So I think the writing's really on the wall here. These companies are going in this direction. They think this could be profitable. I think we're looking at a substantial EV future. That being said, things may slow down as a result of supply chain issues. They are going to continue. We've seen this take place now over the past couple of years. And as I mentioned earlier, with the growing issues with chip nationalism, it wouldn't surprise me if we continue to see issues with supply chain moving forward. The interesting thing that came out of this, though, over the past few years is we've seen more of a push towards quote unquote custom options in the vehicle market. So instead of really relying on whatever your dealer has in stock, a lot of automotive manufacturers have moved towards forcing the customer to order a specific vehicle. So this has pluses and minuses. The customer can get exactly what they want. There's no all right, I'll just take the the black vehicle because that's what you happen to have, when in reality they wanted the red one or some other fun color. They can more specifically pick out types of packages they want, or maybe a different trim level or type of engine. And this has the benefits to the manufacturers where they're not pumping out vehicles that no one's going to buy. They can save a lot there on their costs. So it's been kind of an interesting shift that's taken place in the market. As I mentioned earlier, incentives have really started to dictate price. We're seeing a lot of investments, not only on the manufacturing front, but also with component manufacturers based on where they're able to get some of those tax breaks and realize some of those incentives from different governments. In particular, there's an estimate that manufacturers are going to spend over $500 billion developing EVs through 2026. And I think at the end of the day, customer demand is only driving a very small piece of that. I think they're seeing that, they can make a lot of money just by moving into this area and gaining and realizing those tax benefits. There's also the interesting factor of what's happening with batteries specifically. So looking at component manufacturers, tax credits for those folks are growing, particularly here in the US. There's now the battery belt, quote unquote, that's developing across the Midwest and the South. We're seeing operations pop up from Michigan down to Alabama. There's a lot of advantages due to existing energy costs in those areas to run these plants. And they also have the advantage of setting up strategically near existing auto manufacturing plants that are in those areas. So really what this is leading to is a reshaping of the global landscape of where the auto market is going to be developed. We're seeing these battery belts develop. I think we're going to see a bit of a quasi battle between the US and China in terms of who is going to be producing the most batteries. Right now, China is far and away the leader. I believe they control just under 60% of what's produced. And then the rest of it, quite frankly, is almost exclusively made in other parts of Asia between South Korea and Japan. However, the large investments and incentives that are being offered by the US government right now, I think we'll start to see that tide turn a little bit, especially with the growth of these batteries. I think we're also going to see a growth in recycling. So efforts are already underway to recycle the batteries that are already out there, primarily for environmental reasons. But in the future, I think we may see that these batteries get recycled more as a competitive advantage. It would not be such a long shot to assume that companies will start to offer a green battery or a recycled battery in their vehicles as an offering to consumers. They may have the option of selecting this. It's a slightly less expensive battery because it's been refurbished, but they have the added benefit of ESG considerations when putting that into their vehicles. There are a number of plants that are starting to crop up specifically focused on recycling batteries. Redwood Materials is a great example. They had a previous plant in Nevada, and they're now building a new one in South Carolina, again, to be closer to the existing levels of production. And then finally, the battle for the better battery is really going to be a key throughout the marketplace. Whoever can increase their range substantially is going to be much more favorable in the eyes of consumers. So with all of this talk of batteries, of course, that leads to the conversation about charging and how that needs to scale and is scaling today. There still are a lot of problems with the ability to charge. The infrastructure is still pretty limited in some instances, particularly folks that are out in rural or even suburban areas may not necessarily have access to as many chargers as they would like. And that leads to range anxiety, or where they're concerned that they might not be able to make it to their destination and back. However, again, just as we've been talking with everything else, there's a lot of funding being dumped into this marketplace. The US federal government is putting about $5 billion. They started to offer that up to states to fund EV charging infrastructure over the next 5 years. California separately earmarked another almost $3 billion to put in about 90,000 chargers over the next couple of years. And then manufacturers are also getting involved. So we see Mercedes-Benz is looking to spend about $1 billion on setting up a high-powered North American charging network. They are collaborating with charging station developers like ChargePoint, and then they also have a part of Goldman Sachs that's helping finance that operation as well. But that being said, that's looking to add about 2,500 DC fast charging plugs in over 400 hubs across the country, and those will be plug agnostic. And that's a great transition to talking about standardizing charging plugs. So coincidentally enough, when we were developing this report, there was some chatter in the marketplace about what was going to happen, particularly here in North America, in the quote unquote battle between the combined charging system, or CCS, and the North American charging standard, NACS, which is also known as the Tesla connector. So CCS is the global standard realistically. It is on most other brands, on most other vehicles aside from Teslas. However, Teslas have a far greater market share here in North America. So Tesla, we believe, in an attempt to help bring in folks to their charging network and gain those revenues, was hinting that they were going to start offering adapters and allowing folks to utilize their supercharger network. That, of course, has all now come to fruition in the past couple of weeks, and we're going to start to see folks utilizing these supercharging systems. So you might start to see a Nissan Leaf or a Hyundai Ioniq sitting at those supercharging spots. The interesting thing with that, though, is we think as this continues to grow, the roadside will evolve. The number of convenience stores, quick service restaurants that are investing in charging infrastructure is actually really interesting. 7-Eleven, Starbucks, they are all investing in installing these charging stations at certain locations throughout the country. And it's probably only a matter of time before you start to see them at most locations. We already see them at shopping malls and shopping plazas. It will become a great way for companies to encourage folks that have EVs to visit their establishments and their different locations. What's interesting is what's going to happen to the traditional rest stop, gas station, those roadside attractions. Will they all need to shift? Will you need to start seeing that the world's largest rubber band ball needs to also offer EV charging stations in order to continue encouraging folks to visit their roadside attraction? This has also been a big debate in more rural areas like national parks. Rivian pretty famously had noted that they were going to install a number of charging ports at trailheads across the U.S. At national park locations. To date, as far as I know, that installation progress has been pretty lackluster and is lagging behind what was expected. So again, we really do need to see some advancements there before this is going to encourage a lot of folks to purchase and utilize these systems. But again, as we always look for the upside, I think one of the coolest things that's come out is this possibility of bidirectional charging. So the concept isn't necessarily new, but we really started to see it come into play over the past year. We had situations like Ford highlighting that folks were using their Lightning pickups to power weddings that had lost power that were outdoors. Also, in an excellent move, we've seen folks have been able to utilize these vehicles post-storm to be able to power their homes or power sites that are hosting people that have been displaced. So there's a lot of great opportunities here. This picture we actually have here over to the left is from Hyundai. This is a rendering and a conceptualized view of a hotel they're looking to open and offer where, you drive up in your Hyundai, theoretically, and plug in, and that power is your stay. So there's some pretty cool options here. And I think we're going to see some really interesting and unique use cases. There are some cities that are investing in this technology. Some cities in the Netherlands, for instance, are investing pretty heavily in vehicle-to-grid technology to serve as a backup just in case they happen to lose power. And that, can not only help power the city, help defend against loss of power due to storms or even a cyber attack, but then you can also translate that to your home potentially. And it does make me wonder if we'll start to see some more folks get into off-grid living, utilizing their vehicle as a major power source. So being more immersed in your vehicle was also a major theme. So, the transition to EVs has really opened up the cabin. So if you think about what a car looks like from its traditional structure, there's a lot of components running down the middle of the car that take up space. And obviously the engine takes up space in the front of the vehicle. So overall, you have a limited use of what is seating space, storage space, space for electronics, whatever it may be. Utilizing EVs, you can create more of a flat platform based on where the batteries are. And the engine is completely shifted in the vehicle, opening up the front of the vehicle, giving folks now what's called a frunk. So some front storage space, as well as the back and the existing trunk. So that's allowing vehicle manufacturers to create more of a livable space. Vehicle cabins are going to become more dynamic. We're already starting to see this. Hyundai's Ioniq 5 features lounging chairs. So the driver can completely recline flat and actually theoretically take a nap should they choose to. So the thought process behind that is not that they're going to be napping while driving, but if you have to go and plug in your vehicle to charge it, you can now more easily relax waiting the, 10, 15, 30 minutes that it takes to recharge the vehicle, however much charge you're looking for. Certainly if you're sitting there for a longer period of time, it could be great to take a nap, watch a movie, whatever it may be. Overall, though, these are becoming much more comfortable living spaces. And I think we'll start to see an interesting shift there also with roadside attractions, roadside stops, rest areas, gas stations. If these vehicles are much more comfortable to sit in, will there be as much need to stop and pull over and stretch if you're on a long road trip? Or will folks be able to relax a little bit more easily as they're driving? One of the most interesting things that came up this past year that was honestly, I personally think a little bizarre is this concept of simulated driving experiences. So obviously an EV doesn't need any typical shifting of gears in the engine. And some folks have argued that this has led to more disengaged drivers because they're not quite as aware of their speed because they don't have any direct feedback, whether that be physical, auditory, pick another sense. So a number of automakers have actually announced that they're going to start developing a quasi-manual transmission for an electric vehicle. Companies like Lexus and Toyota, Porsche and Audi, Dodge, and also Hyundai feel like there's going to be a market for these types of experiences. So it gives the driver the feeling of shifting the car without really doing much to the actual driving capabilities of the vehicle. It's just more of kind of a fun haptic experience. You get the feeling of shifting. There may be a clutch pedal, an actual stick shift. And a lot of them are also looking to add in simulated engine noises, again, to give you more of a perspective as to how fast you're actually driving. So this is all coming also on the heels of increasing levels of connectivity in vehicles, as well as more entertainment. We're seeing growing levels of entertainment hubs, connectivity through satellite internet, and just giving you the option and the ability to do work, stay connected with folks, download a movie, even get into gaming at this point. We're starting to see instances of that where folks can actually plug an Xbox into their GPU Connect, and the passenger can actually be playing Xbox while driving. Interestingly enough, the screen is tilted at just the right angle so that the driver really cannot see anything that's going on that screen, but it still gives the passenger a pretty interesting and unique experience while sitting there. This LG display that you're seeing here in the picture is a mock-up from them with large screens coming out of the roof. There's also instances cropping up that are looking at rollable screens, more VR and immersive instances, and also the patent from Apple gained quite a bit of traction this year, although it's been out for a bit, where they were thinking about a completely windowless vehicle, or at least a windowless back seat, because you don't need to see outside if you're going to be using a VR headset while you're in the car. Another neat thing that popped up this year is a win, I guess, for broadcast television. There was a coalition of different players from media and mobility that looked at figuring out how to actually send broadcast TV signals to the car. So that's in the works right now. Some pilots are taking place, but it seems as though it's going to be successful. And then the UK government actually gave its blessing for drivers to be able to watch TV should the vehicle be in an autonomous operating mode. Obviously, the cars are not there yet in the UK, so no one's doing that, but it was interesting to see them proactively say yes to that. Kind of an interesting downside, though, with this expansion of entertainment is some folks think that AM radio in the US is going to be eliminated. There are some issues, particularly with electromagnetic interference with AM radio in electric vehicles, but also, quite frankly, just the large amount of entertainment that exists will probably lead to this being eliminated. A lot of automakers have noted that they're already going to remove AM radio capabilities from the car to save space, weight, design considerations. They just don't feel like they need it. That's also leading to an interesting discussion about what the operating system of the actual car is. So we've kind of been in a weird situation where auto manufacturers for a while were creating their own quasi operating systems, and then a lot of them were bringing in options from Apple and from Android with CarPlay and Android. And then now we've seen Google is starting to release Android Automotive, which is really the first integrated system designed specifically for vehicles. So a number of companies like BMW, Chevy, Honda, Polestar, and Volvo have already said that they're going to sign on to offering these. And I believe GM just in the past couple of weeks has said that since they're going to be implementing this, some of their future vehicles will no longer include CarPlay capabilities. So that'll be a bit of an interesting dynamic there to see what that battle looks like between folks that are Apple ecosystem users who go to buy a GM vehicle, and will that work? Or will we start to see a bit of bifurcation between what vehicles folks buy based on the kind of car that they have? Based on the type of phone that they have. So, all of this is really leading to a conversation about data collection. The data collection over time is going to enable more safety and autonomy. But for right now, this really is just a big push to collect as much data as humanly possible. Companies need this to run their algorithms. They need this information to improve the functionality of the vehicles, and test and develop new products. A lot of the vehicles are becoming more self-aware. We're seeing instances where connected solutions are reporting back to manufacturers to let them know of pending issues. We're seeing some interesting things going on with fleets, particularly with tires, where tires are becoming much more intelligent and functional and can send data back, letting the driver or the fleet manager know about tire wear, what the load might be, temperatures, or even if it's in a low grip situation, which is going to lead to much more safety. One of the more interesting things that's happening is vehicles watching you. So we're hearing and seeing a lot of releases about vehicles that are going to start coming out with LiDAR sensors and cameras in the vehicle to monitor driver eye movements and keep track of where drivers are paying attention to. So particularly as autonomous options crop up, you're going to need to be able to ensure that the driver is paying attention, and alert the driver to an instance where they may need to take back over. So the vehicle needs to be aware of what the human is doing that's sitting inside of their vehicle. All this data collection is also leading to some other interesting points. So in addition to just figuring out what's going on with the car, a lot of the cars are starting to identify what's going on around them, and not just the cars that are driving past them, but looking at weather, traffic conditions, road conditions. And these are all data points that are leverageable by a number of different industries. Most interestingly, Waymo is rolling out some mobile weather stations in their new generation of AV hardware that's going out to some of their cars. So they're using this in San Francisco right now to map weather patterns and look at fog and rain. So it's kind of interesting. They will have a better perspective on how the cars might perform if they're going to be moving into inclement weather areas, and give them some better feedback as to what's going on. We think that super apps are starting to grow in the mobility space. We're seeing a lot of companies like Uber and DoorDash have started offering local package delivery, which complements, ride sharing options that they have, rental cars. But a lot of these are also expanding into other services that might be leading down that path of super apps. So the ability to book travel, the ability to connect to your airline, these are all things that are popping up right now. Delta and Lyft's partnership is very interesting, where now in a lot of instances, you can see your flight data, flight information on the way to the airport if you're using a Lyft to get there. And then, kind of a fun thing that's been going on. Well, fun, the experiment was fun, but the idea behind it is very serious and taking pedestrian concerns seriously. A lot of folks are concerned that autonomous vehicles are not going to stop, are not going to be safe for them to walk around. And a big rationale behind that is that they don't know what the vehicle is necessarily going to do. There is something to be said for being able to see a person who's driving the vehicle. So some researchers at the University of Tokyo and Kyoto University partnered up to experiment. And that's what you see here with this interesting looking vehicle here to the left. This is a golf cart that they've added quote unquote googly eyes to, mechanical eyes. And the vehicle was actually driving around, and the eyes would indicate where it was looking and also where it was planning on going. And pedestrians that were involved in the study indicated that they felt a lot safer trying to cross the street with these vehicles. They felt as though the vehicle saw them and was much more willing to stop or avoid them should an incident occur. Poland is actually doing some testing of front vehicle brake lights. So indicating to pedestrians that a vehicle has come to a complete stop or is actively braking, again, just helping them feel more confident in crossing the street. So from here, I'd like to transition into robotics. We've seen that cobots are becoming much more of a coworker than just a complement to what's going on in the workplace. One of the big things to pay attention to is what's going on from a legislative perspective. The Warehouse Workers Protection Act that was signed in New York this past year. The goal of that was to protect warehouse distribution workers from undisclosed or unlawful work speed quotas, and also put a number of protections in for them who fail to meet some of these unlawful quotas. While this is great for employees and is certainly needed, I think this may lead to a number of these types of warehouses or similar types of operations replacing these folks in the long term. You don't need to worry about production quotas with a robot. You can run that thing into the ground. So you may see ultimately over time that a number of these companies just decide to replace their human workforce with robotic ones. Swarms, broadly speaking, are enabling a lot more efficiency out in the workplace and are theoretically going to enable some more efficiency if they can be utilized in some more creative ways. There was a study at Harvard where a number of scientists developed these items called RANTs, R-A-N-T-S, designed to basically be a robotic colony of ants. So instead of tracking based on pheromones, they tracked based on photomorns, which are basically just following a light from the other robot that's in front of it. So it enables them to follow each other autonomously, and they can then utilize that capability to work on something as a group rather than as a single robot. We've seen a number of advancements in exoskeletons, with groups working on developing more self-contained battery-powered options to help users gain more mobility and really customizing that to their specific gait and pace. Hopefully that will lead to not only helping folks overcome some mobility challenges, but even increase their capabilities and add to their strength, particularly in a workplace environment. And I talked a little bit about this before, but last mile delivery is a struggle, but a lot of robots are being developed in this space. Starship Technologies continues to be one of the main leaders here, but a new offering this year, which is displayed to the left there from Autonomy, O-T-T-O-M-O-N-Y, they are offering a new robot that is able to move this package out of the robot into a person's hands, into a drop box, or actually put it up on the stoop. So this is helping solve some of those last mile delivery challenges, and again, getting us a little bit closer to true autonomy in that delivery space. The other thing that was happening in robotics is imitating real life and imitating and shrinking down robots to be a little bit more like insects. Those insect-like designs continue to be extremely popular for creating smaller size robots, but we also saw some other interesting use cases with fluid robots. There was the really famous magnetic slime robot that came out of the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and that used a non-Newtonian fluid that was able to move around in really tight spaces and reform itself. Hopefully, they're hoping that that can be used in medical situations, but right now it's not really safe for human consumption at this point. We also saw some interesting things with using live organisms ethically to try out manipulating their nerve cells to actually get them to move. So some researchers compelled the Venus flytrap to close upon request, which was kind of an interesting use case. And then we also saw the effectively invention of the field of necro robotics, where researchers at Rice University basically create a hydraulic system to open and close a deceased spider's legs. So a lot of interesting developments going on in the space this year. Drones, really, I think the big thing we saw this year is that swarms, I don't know, from my perspective, just did not live up to their capabilities. There are a lot of possibilities here, but they're not really being used in any sort of creative ways. We're seeing a lot of them be used in, advertising and entertainment functions. They've replaced fireworks. They can be used for advertising, but there's very few use cases that are beyond that. There is this one here pictured to the left where a number of researchers were looking at 3D printing with the help of a drone, with the goal of creating structures very rapidly or very quickly, which could be an interesting use case. But hopefully we'll see some more situations where drones are used in a larger grouping to conduct work more efficiently. Fleets are expanding, and we're seeing more and more testing. Legislation is limiting some of the innovation that's going on here, but there are some great tests taking place which may help open up this marketplace. We're seeing package delivery tests, heavier package load tests, and even situations like the Royal Mail was testing flying out mail to more remote islands in Scotland and delivering their mail that way. So hopefully we'll see some of these options will help increase and improve the delivery space and the use of drones and these capabilities. The last thing that I wanted to touch on here was just what was going on with eVTOLs. Some folks are referring to these as flying taxis. I mentioned before what was going on in Dubai. Investments really slowed over the past couple years, but we have seen a bit of renewed growth actually in the past couple months from some of the airlines, as well as some automakers. Interesting enough, Stellantis agreed to get involved in developing some drones and actually build those out for Midnight, which is the eVTOL developed by the startup Archer. We also saw some great situations crop up with ocean-faring drones, with uncrewed shipments going out, particularly like the ones from IBM, as well as NYK Line's experiment out in Tokyo Bay. So a lot happening this year. So what to do with all of this? What are those key takeaways? Really, at the end of the day, every business needs to think about absorbing these increasing levels of data. So much information is being created, whether it be from your vehicle, from your drone, from your robots. You need to be able to ingest that and utilize it. Anybody in the manufacturing, warehouse, delivery, or any sort of labor-intensive space really needs to start reevaluating and looking at those opportunities for automation. This is not about eliminating folks. This is about enabling people, your employees, to take on higher order, higher level jobs. Get them out of these dull, dirty, dangerous situations and allow them to work on stuff that only a human can do that really requires that thought process. There are a lot of impacts here from an insurance use case perspective. We really need to start thinking about how this is going to impact liability, as well as workers' compensation and even property premiums. So this is both from the insurer's perspective, as well as you as the business. How will this impact your premiums, and what can you do with that additional capital, or if that capital is going to be shifted around at all? We talked a lot about mobility spaces changing. So what the cabin of that car is going to look like, the cabin of a truck could even look like. Are there options and opportunities for you and your business or other businesses out there to get involved in those spaces? Can you create entertainment options there, technology options, communication? Will some of your employees start working in their cars more frequently? There's a lot of possibilities there. And then finally, municipalities and different government organizations really need to start thinking about what all of this is going to mean for their infrastructure over the next 5 to 10 years. Businesses need to start planning for this, and we need to see, distinct legislation and moves made to make sure that, we're going to be able to accommodate electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, robots on sidewalks, drones flying around. These things are all coming. We need to make sure that we're prepared for them. So that was a lot of information, a lot of things to consider. This is a pretty broad and diverse group of concepts. We'd like to open it up now to any questions that you may have cropped up during the webinar. And Ryan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks for that compelling update on mobility, robotics, and drones. Seems like there's a lot of interesting things and a lot of disparate areas. So again, we just want to thank you for explaining a lot of that to us. We did have some questions come in, and there might be some more that come in as well. Something that I don't think you addressed directly. We're wondering about the dealership model. How do you see the dealership model maybe transforming in the future, especially as you see an increase in EVs, a decrease perhaps in ICM vehicles? How do they reconcile and those differences and balance those needs? And could they become more than just hubs for charging vehicles in the future? Just what do you see there, or have any feelings relating to that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and definitely something that needs to be considered from a number of different perspectives. So there's two facets to that. There's the dealer as in the sales portion of the process, and then there's a dealer in terms of the service part of the process. I do think we're going to see more manufacturers shift to more of a direct-to-consumer model, and the dealer might just become effectively a showroom at the end of the day. They keep a couple cars on site that you can look at and test, sit in, look at some of the options, but I don't think you're really going to be buying a car directly from a dealer for too much longer. We've seen that a couple of brands have already started to explore this. Tesla is famous for having done this, but you know, the idea of purchasing a more customized vehicle isn't very foreign to the market. And other brands are looking into this. I think Ford's looking at this. I also want to tell you that a couple others that are more in the mass market space are looking to this as well. Servicing is really where I think a lot is going to get upended. If you look at what's happening with EVs, you know, if you're a traditional internal combustion engine service bay, you really don't have a lot of options to service EVs other than rotating or changing tires. The EVs come in much less frequently because they don't need an oil change. They're supposed to get inspected every, I forget what it is, 15, 20,000 miles, but I'm not sure how many people actually do that. You're supposed to get the batteries tested periodically. I'm not sure how many people actually do that. So I think most folks are going in to get their tires rotated and changed eventually, but that's really it. So I actually kind of wonder if the servicing model shifts away from dealers and more towards tire providers, tire stores, and you see kind of the shift of power over to them. So instead of just being a supplier, they really become the main hub for servicing that takes place in the EV market. But it'll be interesting to see how things evolve. Ford is also, I know I'm talking a lot about Ford during this, I apologize, but Ford is also starting to offer more at-home servicing. So that's another option, another model that some car manufacturers or dealerships could explore.
And of course, looking at secondary and third order impacts, that's not just disrupting dealership models. That has, as you brought up, you know, repair industry, but also could impact things such as insurance and things of that nature, right? So when we look at these, we do want to explore fully all of those different impacts. Yeah, so you can weigh in there, or I know for the sake of time, we can look at one or two other questions real quick. So
yeah, maybe yeah, I can talk insurance all day, but we don't want to bore people there on the phone. Yeah, let's maybe take one more.
Okay, so we had another one relating to the simulated experience function or way of interacting with the vehicle. I'm going to drop this reference, and I hate to do it, I'm sorry, but it's almost like a simulacra and simulation. At some point, we're not going to be driving a car. It seems like it's going to be driving us, and we're just pretending fully. But before we get to that moment, do you see any type of, well, it was stated here, video game experiences, or I'll say AR experiences that can impact the driving experience? Could you be in the Indy 500 while you're actually just driving along, but also what types of regulatory or safety concerns could maybe prevent that from unfolding as well?
Yeah, I mean, the idea of you're just the kid in the shopping cart with the fake wheel, as you're being pushed along, I don't think it's too far off. No, I mean, I don't think we're going to see anybody simulating running the Indy 500 in the front seat anytime soon. I think you'll see a lot of those experiences for passengers, both, front seat and back seat, but at least for the time being, the driver is going to be focused on what's going on in the real world. Once we go to full autonomy, yeah, the possibilities are endless. You could theoretically do anything in the car, but we're probably still, a ways away from that. In terms of regulations for letting passengers do these things, there's really nothing preventing them, as far as I know, from experiencing anything if you're in the passenger seat. So like I mentioned, you can play video games now in the passenger seat in certain vehicles. There are more options that are cropping up for back seats. Certainly with some of these options like broadcast TV to the car, and the increase of satellite internet. I mean, I think the day where the back seat of your car is no different than your living room is not far off, where you could theoretically, pop on Netflix or HBO or whatever your streaming platform of choice is, and be enjoying that from the back seat. So really, I think regulation legislation is just about the driver, and we'll be focused on that one seat in the car for the time being.
Well, thanks for going there. Thanks for answering those questions. For the sake of time, we do need to wrap there, but if you do have any other questions, of course, you can reach us at hello@futuretodayinstitute.com. We do encourage you to go to our website, download the reports. You will find so much more information and exhaustive information relating to mobility and drones and robotics. Yeah, so we just love for you to subscribe there and get all kinds of different content relating to the future and signals of change and trends. Nick, I'll just leave it to you if you have any parting words.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks everybody for joining. Hope you're able to join some of the other webinars that we have. Again, futuretodayinstitute.com/events. You can check those out as well.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody. Have a good day.